And we're off. Back to Esther. I almost said Hebrews. We're jumping all the way up to chapter 4. What happened last week? What did we cover last week?
What's his name? His name over there.
Mordecai?
Mordecai.
Or King Ahasuerus? Right?
Bless you.
Yeah. Right? And Mordecai has this enemy, so to speak, Haman. What do we learn about those two guys? Mordecai is a Jew. Haman is an Amalekite. Descendant of one of the kings. Remember King Agag? Right?
Yeah, I believe it.
So anyway, and the king is tricked into issuing this executive order that says that everybody has to bow down to Haman, except Mordecai won't do it. So Haman is all kinds of mad at Mordecai. So he goes in, right? And convinces the king to issue another executive order that all Jews must die. Wasn't bad enough to take care of Mordecai.
Yeah, gonna kill them all.
We're going to kill them all. That sounds pretty much like a Satan-inspired,
I would say that, go down that line.
right? So that's our prep. And then we get here to chapter 4, right? In verse 1, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate
I think that's what it's.
clothed in sackcloth. Why was that? How come you couldn't come near the king in sackcloth and ashes and wail?
I don't know.
Well, the king didn't want any sadness around him,
I could go for that.
you know. So it all had to stay away. So he came as far as the king's gate. Now, you know, he sat in the king's gate, so he had some kind of position. Okay? But it wasn't right at the front row because Haman didn't realize he wasn't bowing to begin with. He had to be informed. Okay? But nonetheless, now he's coming as far as, and he's wearing sackcloth and ashes, right? The symbol of tremendous sadness. And he's wailing loudly. Think he's getting anybody's attention?
Probably not.
Did they hire whalers back in those days?
Yeah, they
Did for funerals.
Funerals and
Yeah.
hire mourners.
But here we got Mordecai, even in the midst of tremendous emotional turmoil here, he's still obeying the law. He didn't go into the king's gate with his sackcloth and ashes on, right? Now, why do you think Mordecai was so sad?
Well, he was overlooked, probably. Job jealousy, position jealousy.
Well, you know, obviously the king, he got the notice that all the Jews are going to die in December. Right?
Yeah.
All the Jews are going to die, and he puts on sackcloth and ashes. But remember, he is the enemy of Haman.
Okay.
You think maybe he feels guilty that he's somewhat responsible for the death of all the Jews?
Indirectly, perhaps.
You know? So you can imagine the emotional turmoil he's going through at this point. Not only is all his people scheduled to die, he probably feels somewhat responsible. Okay? In verse 3, and in each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. So as the word spread out across the kingdom, of course, the Jews are all pretty unhappy about this.
I think so.
You would think, right? Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her And the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. She heard that Mordecai is wearing sackcloth and ashes and wailing. But that's all she knew. The women were, secluded. Especially the king's wives and his concubines, right? Anybody attending them had to become a eunuch, right? He's protecting his herd, He had them all over there separated, and other people didn't get to just come see him. Even the king's wife, right?
Yeah.
But she finds out that he's all distraught, and she sends him this clothes, and he says, Then Esther summoned Hathach, right? And Hathach, which by the way means runner, from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and learn what this was and why. And Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. So he went to Mordecai right where he's at. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of the money Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. How on earth did Mordecai know that? Who was in the room when Haman was tricking the king? There wouldn't have been a big audience, would it?
Yeah. Told him all.
Well, Mordecai knew, right? Now, Hathach is a member of the court, right? He's a eunuch that is assigned to the queen.
Right.
It's pretty risky opening up to him. He could have gone straight to the king. But he gave the message to take back to Esther. Right? Maybe somebody, one of the other court officials, was nearby enough to hear what had happened. And maybe they were Jews too. Just like Esther was, nobody knew. It was not uncommon. Obviously, Daniel, we know about a lot of people that had been appointed high positions in the Babylonian Empire. Now it's the Persian Empire, right? That were useful if you were good at what you did.
Yeah.
So it could have been there was somebody there who then came and told Mordecai. We don't know.
Okay.
Now, we know that Esther is about to be used by God, right?
You betcha.
Okay? So the bottom line is, even though we don't have the name of God listed anywhere in the book of Esther, we have these references and this implication that God is in control, is orchestrating this whole thing. That's why Esther is put where she's put. And maybe somebody else in the court. We don't know that. All we know is somehow Mordecai knew.
Yeah.
Right? In verse 8, he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go to the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. Now, that he might show Esther and inform her. You know why? The odds are she couldn't read.
Well, that's probably, yeah, never thought of
They
that.
didn't educate women. There were a lot of men at that point that couldn't read. And so the eunuch, on the other hand, so he's going to show her the deal and read it to her, and let her, so she'll now know exactly what has happened and why, including the amount of the bribe. And then he says, now you gotta go to the king. Now, Mordecai is the guy who raised her, right? He was her protector. He's about to send her into danger.
Mm-hmm.
Not that she's not already in danger, right? She's a Jew. Okay? So it's kind of a flip here, but so he says to order her. This is a command. And Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king, to the inner court, who is not summoned, he has but one law, but that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. Why would there be a law that you can't come to the king unless you be summoned?
Part of what you said a while ago, they didn't want any unhappiness around them.
Not to mention safety. Remember, kings
Absolutely.
had people who tasted their food and their drink to make sure it wasn't poisoned before they ate, right? You could not just come to the king, because that is suspicious. So you had to be summoned in order to come to the king. And then she's like, and he hadn't even called for me in 30 days.
30 days.
Been a month. Now, I don't know if that's a literal 30 days or if she's implying it's been quite a while since the king has asked for me. Why is he not calling Esther?
Because he has so many, her number has to come back up.
Well, he's only got one wife, but he's got hundreds of concubines,
So,
right? Yeah, he was probably just a little occupied.
yeah.
Okay? So here's this going on, and she's like, I may be out of favor. So if I go in there out of favor, if he doesn't raise his golden scepter, I'm toast. Right? Now, here's a king. At this time, apparently the strongest king on earth, although the Persians lost their battle with Greece twice, right? But nonetheless, in order to go to the king, he had to summon you. What do you have to do to go to God?
Oh, you don't need an intercessory. You don't need an
Just
invitation.
drop to your knees.
Direct access to the throne of very God himself, right? People couldn't go see the king, but we can go see God.
Right.
Is there a difference there? Then ask yourself this question. How often do you go?
Not enough.
Hopefully every day. And
How many times a day?
there isn't any
Sometime two, sometime three.
three. There's no
Every time I go to
distinct
bed.
time, of like the Jews, prayed X amount of times a day. There's, in Islam,
Well,
actually
the
the
point
world
being
is
is that if you had access to the king, how often would you go? Anytime you needed anything.
Yeah, anytime that you
Right.
needed anything.
And we have access to God himself. And how often do we go? Only when our backs are against the wall?
Pretty much.
Or at our established prayer time, like before we go to bed or whatever, right? We have access to the very throne of God Almighty because of the blood of Jesus, right?
That's right. But we act as if we lived in New York City, where the Empire State Building is. Ask the people in New York City, how many times have you gone to see that building, or even gone up in that building to look?
Only if you work there.
Only if you work there or when relatives come.
Yeah. Right?
But it's kind of that same
But
premise.
we're not
in a
taking
way.
advantage
Oh, no.
of one of the greatest things that we have, right? And these people were denied access to the king, and yet we have access to God. A little
And-
bit bigger dude than the king,
And isn't it
right?
in one of the epistles of Paul, where we're to pray without ceasing?
Right, exactly.
So it's continuous
Well, that's what we should be doing, and thus just keep talking to God all day
all
long.
day long.
Ang was praying at dinner yesterday, and he prayed with his eyes open. And I told him, I pray with my eyes open sometimes too, especially when I'm driving.
That's good.
Yeah.
I loved it whenever Gold's Gym was over here in the shopping center, that, their sign, their neon sign out front, of course, in the daylight, it was Gold's Gym, but at night, it was God's Gym. That Gold was not there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I thought that was just the way life is, whenever things are great, then we're going after the gold,
Mhm.
But then when things don't go our way and things get dark, then we're willing to give God
Yeah,
all these things.
yeah. Now we're willing to ask God for help.
That's God's stuff, God, this,
Yeah.
it's your car, your house, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it, but just take care of it.
Me, he takes care of you.
Isn't that the way it is?
Then they like to go back after the money.
Yeah.
Verse 12. And they related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. Right? He's telling them you're going to die anyway. If we don't do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
If something doesn't happen, you're going to die. So he tells her, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. Who's he counting on to provide deliverance from another place if it's not Esther?
He's
God.
counting on God, yeah.
God's going to protect his people,
Mm-hmm.
one way or another, right? He puts you in a place to do it, but if you don't do it, he's going to do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
Right? And you and your father's house will perish. If you remain silent, you're toast. The Jews are going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
You won't. He's telling her she doesn't have anything to lose by going in there, right? And doesn't it demonstrate a substantial faith in God?
Very much.
Where's he at? He's in Susa, right? The winter capital of the Persian/Babylonian Empire, long ways from home, in Jerusalem, which to Mordecai was probably home. Kind of. Obviously, he didn't go back when they were, or his father didn't go back when it was time to go back, right? But nonetheless, he's saying, look, God's going to take care of us. He puts you in this position. He goes on to say, and who knows whether you have not obtained royalty for such a time as this? Don't you think God put you there for this reason? Which again comes back to, where are we in our life? God has put us where to do what? Is there something we should be doing that God's put us in a position to do that we need to do? And it doesn't have to be something as big as save all the Jews.
Our number one job on earth is to witness.
Tell the story. Right. Whenever you get the opportunity to witness for Christ, do you do it?
Not near as much as.
I miss some opportunities.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure. More than I'm aware of, I'll bet. Right? But sometimes witnessing is simply doing something for somebody else.
Absolutely.
Right? Sometimes it's verbal. But constantly be serving so that God gets the credit.
Absolutely.
So you're telling the story with your actions,
Actions.
and then
And
with
the
your
words.
words, right?
When I was teaching rosary we had a principal that, was at Brother Obama, that, his situation was that he, went into the bank, he was there, when he came out of the bank, he couldn't decide if he were to go upstairs, see a friend of his as an army recruiter, or going about his day, and so he decided not to go upstairs. Walked out of the building, was across the street from the murder building, and the explosion occurred. He was
Oh,
thrown up against the wall across the street from the murder building. But he was haunted by the fact that he was still alive and did not know why God spared him. I mean, he told me that he prayed and God would not tell him why he was still here. And, you know, he just couldn't accept the fact of what was just said, you know, we're here to help other people. But
Did he ever figure it out? Did you know?
I left Rosary, so I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Could have been years later,
yeah.
right? We don't know how many years this is after Esther became queen, right?
Right.
Somewhere around 5 years, you know, that time had lapsed, and now all of a sudden, she's needed,
Yeah.
right? Then in verse 15, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, right? Get everybody together. And by the way, Esther is now commanding this go. This is a command too.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
And fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. Now, this is a very unusually strict fast for Jews. It was common for them to fast during the day, but not at night,
No, yeah.
and not to avoid liquids. You know, they would avoid food, but not liquids.
It's not liquid.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and then they would usually eat at night. Okay? This, she's saying 3 days of nothing. And fast implies prayer and fasting. Okay? And she says, and I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. Now, her maidens, I wonder if they're Jews. Was she able to pick her maidens? And did she pick other Jews to come live in the palace with her and, you know, whatnot?
If she had that authority, she probably did.
You know, but asking them to fast, if they weren't Jews, for 3 days, because the Jews were going to die, you know. So I wonder if they weren't Jews also, right? And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Right?
Guys, I gotta go to the door.
Okay. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. So here they are, spending their 3 days of fasting and prayer, preparing for her to go to the king. By the way, before we go real quick, Max wanted to do a little testimony at this point. He's a preacher, right? He was in, during the Korean War, he was in Alaska, right?
Uh-huh.
But he heard a sermon on Esther, right here. And when this came across him, that's when he surrendered to preach.
Isn't that something?
You know, right, so he wanted to give that testimony when we got to this point. If you remember, I asked him last week, if
Yeah.
he wanted to wait, and today he's not here, so I'll tell it for him, you know. You probably can tell a lot better than I can. He was there. But anyway, yeah. Now what happens after this? Because we don't cover the rest of Esther. Next week we move on. What happens after this? Esther does go, doesn't she? The king does hold up the golden scepter, tells her anything you want, knowing that she wouldn't have come if it wasn't important.
Right.
So the king, because he still had favor for her, and he said, whatever you want, up to half my kingdom. And she said, I'd like to have a dinner with you and Haman. Haman's thinking, whoo, man, am I a big deal now? So they have a dinner. And the king says again, what is it you desire? She says, let's have one more dinner tomorrow. So they did it again. In the meantime, Haman is having a gallows built to hang Mordecai on, right? Then the king says, what is it you want, Esther? And she says, I want you to save my people. I'm a Jew. You have issued a decree, right, to have all of us killed. And the one responsible for that is Haman. Haman realizing he's suddenly in trouble. The king, in his, probably his anger over being tricked, steps out of the room. Haman falls on her couch, pleading for his life. When the king returns, he's like, he's even after my wife in my house. So Haman got hanged on the gallows that he built for Mordecai, right? Another edict was issued because in the Babylonian and Persian deal, right? Once it's issued, it's issued. It can't be nullified.
Right.
But he issued a new one that says Jews can defend themselves. Which you would think they would have done. I don't know. But they did. The time came, they defended themselves, they won, right? Everywhere across the kingdom, because who's in control?
God.
God's in control.
God was in control the whole time. Right? How often does somebody set a trap for a good people that end up falling into their own trap? Like Haman's gallows. By the way,
I would
one
think a
commentary
lot.
said that the gallows was not really a hanging deal. It was a deal where you drop, in this case, 90 feet onto and get impaled on a stake.
After your head would be popped off.
You know? So I'm not sure, we don't know which is which, but one commentary said that's actually what the gallows was.
90 feet. God.
Yeah, it's 90 feet tall. Right?
That.
So since that was still in effect, you know, they had to have a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Has God asked you to do anything that would put you in danger?
No,
I don't really think so.
I think I may perceive it as
I'd
danger
go with,
if I don't really, recognize it. God wouldn't actually do it if it's gonna be harmful to me. But,
In most cases. In some cases, people are sent to foreign lands to where it's very hostile and Christians
Oh, yeah.
are martyred. You
Martyred
know, we've had
every
martyred
day.
Christians throughout history, right?
people have been willing to go to fight the Ebola, I mean, to care for people that, you know,
Yeah, amazing. Yep.
if I felt God calling me, I'm not sure if I'd answer that one.
Which brings me to I don't know the guy's name. He was a missionary living in Europe. And I can't think of that guy's name either. That quote evangelist, it's faith healer guy. But he was on TBN and he was telling the story of the guy in Europe,
Oh.
right? And the guy in Europe was like, what? You want me to go to Africa? I don't want to go to Africa. You know,
Reinhard Bonnke?
I don't think it was him, but I mean, maybe it was in the very beginning before he went down there. And of course, God used him to save millions of people, right? But it was somebody that didn't want to go. And then the Lord asked him, are you willing that I should make you willing? And he answered yes, and he went to Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Are you willing that I make you willing?
and sometimes we have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop and say, Lord, I'm fighting this deal, that deal, whatever. I need you to adjust my attitudes,
Yeah.
right? Because I can get off base in a hurry. Don't leave it up to me, right? That's the first bell I've heard.
It is.
It was long, so it's probably both of them. All right.
Yeah.
Any questions about Esther?